The voice came from the back of the studio. Dylan O'Brien's face completely collapsed. And Jimmy Fallon had no words. The cameras were rolling live. The Tonight Show, Tuesday night, October 2023. Jimmy Fallon sat behind his desk in his signature suit, grinning that infectious grin that had made him America's favorite late-night host. Dylan O'Brien was in the guest chair. The young actor known for Maze Runner and Teen Wolf, charming and articulate, telling a funny story about a mishap on his latest film set. The audience was laughing. The Roots were grooving softly in the background. Everything was exactly as it should be, polished, professional, entertaining. Dylan was mid-sentence, gesturing with his hands, building to the punchline of his story. "So I'm hanging from this wire, 20 feet in the air, and the stunt coordinator yells." And then he stopped. Not a natural pause. Not a comedic beat. His entire body went rigid. His hands froze mid-gesture and slowly lowered to grip the armrests of the orange guest chair. His face, animated and smiling just seconds before, transformed in an instant. His eyes went wide. His mouth opened slightly. Color drained from his cheeks. The audience noticed immediately. The laughter died. 300 people suddenly uncertain what they were witnessing. Jimmy's smile faltered. "Dylan? You okay, buddy?" Dylan didn't respond. He was staring past the cameras, past the audience, toward the back left corner of the studio near the entrance. His eyes were filling with tears. Cameras were live when a voice rose in the studio, and Dylan O'Brien's face completely collapsed. Jimmy Fallon hadn't seen anything like this in 15 years. A voice had called out from the back of the studio. Just one word, but it carried across the space with perfect clarity. "Dylan." Not loud. Not shouted. Just spoken with quiet certainty. But the way it was said, with familiarity, with love, with the weight of years, made it cut through everything else. Jimmy's head whipped toward the back of the studio. His blue interview cards slipped from his fingers, one falling to the floor with a soft flutter. The Roots stopped playing. Questlove lowered his drumsticks. Dylan O'Brien, professional actor, master of composure, trained to perform under any circumstances, was crying openly in the guest chair, tears streaming down his face, unable to speak. The control room erupted. "What's happening? Do we have audio issues? Why did Dylan stop? Jimmy, what?" But Jimmy wasn't listening to his earpiece. He was watching Dylan's face, watching this young man completely shatter on live television, and his host instincts, the carefully cultivated ability to smooth over awkward moments, to keep shows moving, vanished entirely. This was real. This was something beyond television. Jimmy stood up slowly from his desk. "Dylan," he said softly. "Who is that?" Dylan tried to speak. His mouth moved but no sound came out. He was shaking, both hands now white-knuckled on the armrests, his entire body trembling. From the back of the studio, near the entrance where audience members usually waited before taping, a figure stepped into the light. A woman in her early 50s, wearing simple jeans and a cardigan, her face lined with years but her eyes bright with tears and hope and desperate love. Dylan saw her fully now. And the sound that came from him was something no one in that studio would ever forget. A choked sob that was half disbelief, half recognition, entirely pain. "Mom?" The word was barely a whisper but every microphone in the studio caught it. Jimmy stopped mid-response. The entire studio froze. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened 8 years earlier. Dylan O'Brien wasn't always the successful actor sitting in the Tonight Show guest chair. In 2015, he was just breaking through. Teen Wolf had made him recognizable. Maze Runner had made him a star. He was 23 years old, living in Los Angeles, riding the wave of sudden fame and opportunity. His mother, Lisa O'Brien, had been his biggest supporter. She'd driven him to auditions when he was a teenager in New Jersey. She'd encouraged him when he wanted to quit. She'd been the one who believed when no one else did. They'd always been close. Dylan was an only child, and after his father left when Dylan was 12, it had been just the two of them for years. Lisa worked 2 jobs, administrative assistant during the day, waitressing at night, to keep them afloat and fund Dylan's acting dreams. One day, she used to tell him while driving to auditions in their beat-up Honda, "You're going to be on all those talk shows. And I'm going to be in the front row watching." Dylan would laugh. "Mom, that's never going to happen." "It will," she'd insist. "And when it does, I want you to remember who drove you to that terrible audition in Queens where you forgot all your lines." In March 2016, Dylan was filming Maze Runner, The Death Cure in Vancouver. A stunt went wrong. He was hit by a vehicle on set, suffering severe head trauma and facial injuries. He nearly died. Lisa flew to Vancouver immediately. She sat by his hospital bed for 3 weeks while he recovered from surgery, while doctors discussed his prognosis, while the film shut down production. She held his hand and told him he was going to be okay, just like she had when he was a kid with nightmares. Dylan recovered. Slowly, painfully, but he recovered. The film eventually completed. His career continued. But something had changed. The accident had terrified Dylan in ways he couldn't articulate. The randomness of it, how quickly everything could end. How fragile success was. How temporary everything felt. He threw himself into work with obsessive intensity. Back-to-back projects. Constant travel. Press tours, filming, premieres, interviews. He told himself he was making up for lost time, for the year of recovery, for the uncertainty. But really, he was running. Lisa understood, or tried to. But as months turned into years, as Dylan's career accelerated and his schedule became impossible, the calls became less frequent. Visits home became, "I'll come next month, Mom, I promise." Next month became next year. They had a fight in 2018. Dylan couldn't remember now what started it, something about him missing Thanksgiving, or maybe Christmas. Lisa had said something about how success was changing him. Dylan had snapped back that she didn't understand the pressure he was under. "I gave up everything for your dreams," Lisa had said, her voice shaking. "I worked myself to exhaustion so you could chase this. And now that you have it, you don't have time for me? That's not fair," Dylan had shouted. "You think I wanted this to happen? You think I asked to almost die on that set? I'm trying to survive out here, Mom. I'm trying to prove I still can do this. At what cost, Dylan? At what cost?" The call had ended badly. Dylan told himself he'd call back the next day to apologize. But the next day turned into next week, and he was on a plane to London for a film, and the distance grew. He sent her money. Paid off her mortgage. Made sure she was financially secure. He told himself that counted for something. But they didn't talk. Not really. Not the way they used to. In 2020, Lisa was diagnosed with early-onset Alzheimer's. She was only 51. Dylan's publicist told him. Lisa had asked her sister, Dylan's aunt, to tell him because she didn't want to interrupt his filming schedule. Dylan flew home immediately. Sat with his mother in her small house in New Jersey, the house he'd bought for her with his Maze Runner money. She seemed fine. A little forgetful, but fine. "I'm okay, honey," she'd assured him. "You don't need to worry. Go back to work." "I can stay," Dylan had said. "No. This is early stages. I have years. Go live your life. Make movies. Make me proud." So he'd gone back. And he told himself she was right. She had years. He had time. But Alzheimer's doesn't care about timelines. The disease progressed faster than anyone expected. By 2022, Lisa needed full-time care. Dylan hired the best nurses, moved her to a beautiful facility, visited when he could between projects. But the visits became harder. Sometimes she knew who he was. Sometimes she called him by his father's name. Sometimes she looked at him like a stranger. The last time Dylan saw his mother, 6 months ago, in April 2023, she hadn't recognized him at all. She'd been polite but distant, asking the nurse who that nice young man was. Dylan had left the facility, sat in his car in the parking lot, and cried for an hour. He told himself it was over. That his mother, the woman who had driven him to auditions, who had believed in him, who had sacrificed everything, was gone, even though her body remained. He'd stopped visiting. Couldn't bear it. Threw himself into work instead. Booked back-to-back projects. Stayed busy. Stayed numb. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Tonight, Dylan was on The Tonight Show promoting his latest film. It was supposed to be fun. Jimmy always made guests comfortable. The audience was warm. These appearances were easy at this point in his career. He'd walked out to applause, hugged Jimmy, sat in the orange chair. They'd been talking for maybe 4 minutes. Dylan was telling a funny story about the film set, getting laughs, feeling good. And then that voice from the back of the studio. Dylan. The voice he'd known his entire life. The voice that had comforted him through nightmares and celebrated his first audition callback and sat by his hospital bed in Vancouver. His mother's voice. Clear and certain and completely present. Impossible. But real. Lisa O'Brien stood near the studio entrance, flanked by 2 people Dylan didn't recognize, doctors, he would later learn, from her care facility. She was looking directly at him with eyes that were focused, aware, completely lucid. Behind the scenes, Jimmy made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. The control room was chaos. Cut to commercial. We need to cut. This isn't protocol. Jimmy, in your ear, we need to. Jimmy reached up and pulled out his earpiece. Tossed it on the desk without looking. Every producer's nightmare, a host going rogue during live television. But Jimmy Fallon had been doing this long enough to know when to follow the rules and when to throw them out entirely. He walked around his desk, crossed to Dylan, and knelt beside the guest chair. Dylan, he said quietly, is that your mom? Dylan nodded, unable to speak, tears pouring down his face. Do you want her up here? Another nod. Jimmy stood and addressed the studio. His voice was steady, warm, completely sincere. No host's voice, no performance, just human connection. Folks, I think we need to pause everything for a minute. Dylan's mother is here. And I think Dylan needs to talk to her. He gestured toward the back of the studio. Ma'am, would you like to come up here? The doctors helped Lisa down the aisle. The audience members shifted to let them pass, many already crying, sensing they were witnessing something extraordinary. Dylan stood on shaking legs. Jimmy steadied him with a hand on his shoulder, then stepped back, giving them space. Lisa reached the stage. She looked up at her son, the boy she'd driven to auditions, the young man she'd sat vigil over in a Vancouver hospital, the stranger who had visited her care facility while she couldn't remember his name. And her eyes were clear. Completely, impossibly clear. Hi, baby, she said, her voice steady and warm and entirely present. Dylan made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Mom, I'm here, she said simply. I know I haven't been. But I'm here right now. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Jimmy had quietly moved to his desk. He'd opened a drawer and pulled out a simple black notebook, the one he used to write thank you notes to special guests. He returned to Dylan and Lisa, who were holding each other in the middle of the Tonight Show stage while cameras rolled and 300 people watched in reverent silence. Dylan, Jimmy said softly, holding out the notebook. Your mom's here right now. She's lucid. The doctor said this might be one of her last clear moments. Write down everything you need to say. Don't let this pass. Dylan took the notebook with trembling hands. He sat on the edge of the stage with his mother, the cameras keeping a respectful distance, and began writing. Lisa watched him, her hand on his shoulder, occasionally saying, I'm so proud of you. Or, I'm sorry I forgot. The audience didn't make a sound. Jimmy stood with the roots, tears streaming down his face. The control room had stopped shouting. Everyone understood this transcended television. After 10 minutes, Dylan closed the notebook. He handed it to his mother. "Keep this. So when you can't remember, you'll have it written down. Everything I should have said years ago." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The doctors gently explained that Lisa needed to return to the facility. Dylan hugged his mother one more time. "I love you, Mom. I'm sorry I ran." "I know, baby. I always knew." After she left, Dylan sat back in the guest chair, wiped his eyes, and said to Jimmy, "I think I'm done with running now." Jimmy never aired the rest of the planned interview. He just let Dylan talk about his mother, about regret, about second chances. The notebook Dylan gave his mother sits in her care facility room. On days when she can't remember her own name, the nurses read it to her.